of the Rules and Policy Committee of the Tennessee Public Charter Schools Commission, and this is the May 28th, 2020 meeting of the Rules and Policy Committee. We are conducting this meeting virtually in accordance with the COVID-19 orders in place across the state, and the agenda includes instructions for the public to listen to the meeting. This meeting will be archived on the web afterward and will be available via link on the Commission's website. At this time, I would like to call the meeting to order at 1:05 p.m. Central Standard Time. I guess, could we go ahead and do a roll call? Wendy Tucker.
Here.
And David Hanson.
Dave, you're muted, I think.
Yeah, Dave, I think you're muted. David, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yep. Okay, great. So we have all of our members in attendance, and we'd have a quorum established. I also would like to acknowledge that we have Tom Griscom and Christine Richards as well, members of the Tennessee Public Charter Schools Commission. So thank you both for joining us as well. So before we get started, I just want to again note that today's agenda is a review of a number of the policies and documents that the staff of the Commission and the Department of Education will edit based on our feedback and then bring to the full Commission for approval at a later date. So at this time, I do want to turn it over to Chanel Tyler, our Interim General Counsel, and she'll lead us through the discussion of the items noted on the agenda under policy review. Chanel.
Good afternoon, everyone. And like Terrence was saying, we have a number of policies that we'll be looking at. All of them deal with, if you recall, our NACSA training, there's a dual role that you all serve. So there's authorizer on appeal, which were items that we looked at in our last meeting, and then there's your role as an authorizer. And so these are our authorizing policies. So all of them are going to be things with like oversight and how we deal with people that were different charter schools that we're looking over as far as the appellate process and just their general oversight of their operations. So the first item that I wanted to look at is the policy on revocation appeals. So this is unlike our last meeting where we talked about where someone's appealing a decision at the LEA to revoke their charter. This here is, this occurs where someone is appealing the decision under a number of ways. And you'll see at the beginning of the policy, it talks about some of those ways that it might come up. One is if so the Commission can revoke one of its charter schools if it's on the priority list for a cycle. If it's on there for 2 cycles, the law mandates that it should revoke the charter school. Well, it has to revoke it rather. And so one thing that I did at Terrence's recommendation is I actually floated some of these policies over to NACSA, and they've provided a little bit of feedback. They gave it to me last night, and that's something that I can share with you all ahead of our Commission meeting. So if you want to follow along with me in that policy on revocation appeals, I'm looking at the first section under policies. So one thing that they recommended is that in our language where we talk about a cycle of when we would be revoking, they recommended that we define cycle. Now, as written, it tracks the language of the statute. Like the statute says, if after 1 cycle of being on the priority list, a charter school may revoke it. So I don't know if you all have any feedback, if you want to further clarify, but the statute does use that term cycle in there. So that was their feedback on that one. Do you all have any thoughts?
How would we define, I mean, what would the definition be? Isn't the cycle run, is it run every 4 years or?
Yes, so that's what I was thinking. I mean, my personal opinion is that it seems to track this. I mean, it could be that, you know, we could find that language, but as written, it looks like we're at least able to adapt it to whatever the situation is. Like if after one cycle, which is set by like the Tennessee Department of Education, whenever they make their schools on the priority list, right now it just tracks that. So I don't know that there needs to be any more definition, but I did want to float that to you all to see if it was clear to you as written. And then another item that they commented on, if you drop down a little bit on the paragraph starting with other reasons why the commission may revoke a charter agreement, they just wanted us to pretty much let people know that we would revoke anything that's not included in, you know, if they fail to meet what's in the charter school agreement. And so that's something I can add in, just some language to clear that up. As listed, we just have certain items in there, but just to bring that point home that they need to be meeting the requirements of the charter school agreement.
I'm sorry, this is Wendy. Where is this in the furthermore, and then it has the 3?
That is correct. That is correct.
Okay.
Yes. So those 3 items, I just want to add.
Okay.
Sorry?
It says in it, failure to meet the minimum performance requirements in the agreement, material violation of the agreement, or the fiscal management piece. So are they saying they just want it to say violation of the agreement, or they were okay with this language, but wanted to make sure we pointed out that it was an agreement?
Yeah, so I think they're okay with the language. They just want to also make sure that it's consistent in the charter school agreement that we are looking at these items, like whatever we've listed in the charter school agreement is also going to be a reason why we would revoke it. So just kind of bringing that point on home. They didn't say anything about the language being, you know, incorrect. It was just more so making that point clearer. And I can certainly add a sentence or two about that.
Chanel, this is Tess. I also want to make sure that this language in here matches what's in statute, because statute gives 3 reasons why for an authorizer can revoke. And so I would just caution that if there are any adjustments to here, that you are making sure that it is aligned directly with statute.
Absolutely, and that's a good point too. You know, as we're looking at some of the recommendations, making sure that, you know, ultimately we have to follow the statute, right? So that's certainly something that I'll be looking for. So that's a good point, Tess, as we're looking at those 3 items, that they match the statute if we change anything. And I will say, when we floated these policies out to them, they just graciously agreed to kind of look over them at a high level. We don't otherwise have any kind of agreement where they are bound to look at these. It was really just out of the goodness of helping us get us started that they looked at these items. And so I'm sure they do a more, you know, thorough review maybe in a different context, but this was just more high level, some thoughts that they had. And then moving on in the revocation policy, they did, if you look at under public hearing, so one of the things that we've done is we've allowed the governing body of the charter school to have 20 minutes to speak at the public hearing. They suggested that this might be a little bit brief, and that we could maybe make it, allow it to be up to our discretion as to whether or not there needs to be more time. And so just being mindful that that 20 minutes is likely not going to be enough, they're thinking, at least. So I don't know if you all have thoughts on that, or a test, or anyone who's, you know, maybe been in this space. Is that 20 minutes usually been sufficient?
I think it's definitely up to the discretion of the commission. I think that potentially, you could put a line in there that, given circumstances, the executive director could extend that time. I think what we have found in public hearings is that having a clear, defined time for both presentations as well as time for public comment allows the staff to drive a really focused conversation, particularly when it comes to revocations, which are always highly charged and very difficult. So I think if you all wanted additional flexibility, putting in, some sort of discretion to extend time as necessary, I think would kind of meet that need.
Okay.
Like that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, 20 minutes feels short, but I think if we give it the discretion to the executive director, that does allow us the flexibility to accommodate getting the public voice.
Okay. So I'll make a note of that. They didn't have any other comments on this policy, so I just want to open it up to you all. If you all had anything that you would like to see change, or if you had other thoughts that maybe we could incorporate in here.
This is Wendy. I just have a clarifying question. The parts that were removed are the appealing the LEA revocations, and that's in a different, I'm remembering right, that's now in a different policy, right? We still have that, it's just in a different space.
That is correct, yes. So
That's what I thought.
yeah, so yeah, we've looked at those kind of when we were talking about the LEA, like the direct authorizer on appeal type information, and this one is just more focused on our role as an authorizer. We're going directly toward the commission as opposed to through the LEA.
Thank you.
So are there any other thoughts on this policy?
Hey, Chanel, just a really quick question. When they said that the time was short on the 20 minutes, did they give any kind of recommendation or best practice in terms of a longer window, or did they talk about discretion? I know they looked at it really quickly, but I was curious if they gave any guidance.
Yes, so their exact language is that the 20 minutes just seemed extremely brief given the high stakes of what's going on. So they just said that we may prefer to retain some professional judgment over that. So no exact kind of time frame, but just more so leaving it kind of like what we discussed about it being a case by case basis and leaving it to our discretion.
Okay, all right, thank you.
And I would ask Tess, I don't think I attended any revocation. I know I didn't attend any commission revocations because we haven't had any, but I don't know if I attended any revocations that were LEA revocations. But the appeals, I think it's the same timeline, and it felt like 20 minutes sounds short, but like as a lawyer, if I do a 20-minute opening statement, half my jury's asleep. So I don't know that you want to do too much more than 20 minutes absent. I mean, not that they're sleeping during my opening, but.
Yeah, so for revocation appeals, the timeline for the public hearing is the same. So we give 15 minutes for an opening statement, 10 minutes for a closing. What we have done is allow for time for questioning by the executive director of both parties. So that is where we find the most information. Like we're actually able to have read through the information, ask probing questions, follow up on information that was provided in the presentation versus just like a sit and get. So I think my recommendation would be that ensuring the policy that you all are creating are allowing that dialogue. So it's not just the executive director sitting there listening to the presentation and then saying, okay, now we're moving on, but really allowing some of those questions to be asked as a part of that hearing.
Does the policy as written, does that incorporate that? This looks like it was mostly our old policy.
So this, since we actually have not used this policy for revocation purposes, that you all could be on the forefront of applying this policy. As you know, I defer to you. I do think potentially adding in a sub-bullet here referring to potential questions by the executive director as a part of the hearing would cover that base.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. So I'll make a note to just kind of spell that out in the policy that we'd like to, or that we would anticipate that it would be more of a dialogue and not just the presentation.
Yeah, I mean, look at, I guess, number 4 under public hearing. It does reference that the hearing officer may ask questions of the governing body, so that may cover it. But, I think making sure that's a part is important too.
Okay. Okay, do we have any other thoughts on this policy? If not, we can go on to our policy on the renewals. And so I just want to say, starting out, I think, and they also pointed this out too, just that language before purpose, where we start talking, we reference the statute. I do think that it might have been an editing error. That doesn't need to be there because that doesn't really track with what this policy is pertaining to. The language at the top really is more so what we were dealing with last week, or not last week, but our last committee meeting, where we were talking about authorizer on appeal type issues. And this policy right here is getting more towards, again, just as an authorizer, as one of our schools on having a renewal application. And so that was one of the first comments on here. And again, that's just to that language above purpose. So I anticipate that I would just delete that section. Their next comment is, if you go down point 1A, we're talking about generally. They pointed out that April 1st is not a typical timeline, but I will say that tracks with the statute. I think they actually said that applications that they've seen are usually due around October 1st, so that it can align with summer and fall state assessments. But the way the policy is written really does track with the timeline that's presented in statute. So I don't know that we can really change anything there. But I do think it's a good thought, but I think we have to stick with where we are on that one. And that was really their last comment on this policy. So I'll open up for a discussion. If there's anything that you all that's stood out to you all that we might want to modify. Again, like the other policy, this one really tracks closely to what the state board was doing, or rather their policy that they had in place. So it's a tried and true method to the extent that it's come up for them. So like I said, those were the only 2 comments on this policy, but if there's anything else, I'm happy to incorporate those as well.
Nothing from me.
Nothing from me. Thanks, Chanel.
Okay. So the next on our list are the core authorizing principles. And I'll give you all a chance to pull those up as well. So on these, again, there wasn't a ton of feedback, but if you look under the section dealing with maintaining high standards, they did suggest kind of rewording that subpoint C. So right now, it says that we would be holding charter schools accountable for, over time, meeting the performance standards and targets set forth in their charter agreements on a range of measures and metrics. And their comment was that they would edit it to read standards and targets on a range of measures and metrics set forth in charter agreements. And they said that the measures and metrics on which a school is evaluated should be incorporated into the contract. So it was just more of a, I guess, a note on that. And like I said, I'll forward all of these comments to you all ahead of the meeting. So if you all see something there that you like in between time, I'm here to also kind of follow back up with you on that point. And then the only—
Can I just ask?
Sure.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I just wanted to make sure I understand that. So basically what they're saying is to make it clear in the sentence that the range of measures and metrics are set forth in the charter agreement by flipping those clauses, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay. I mean, that makes sense to me. That's how I would read it anyway, but if that makes it where you can't argue you're reading it a different way and there are other measures and metrics that are being used. So that makes sense to me.
Yes. And then, so their only other comment on this policy deals with Part 4 about protecting students in public interest. So their comment says that they would also consider adding a commitment to equity. And so they did say that this is not currently part of their set of materials, but they would also include some language about committing to the prioritizing of the state's most academically vulnerable students so that they are can thrive in academically and social emotionally. So again, it's just really adding some kind of language in there about equity. And they said that this wasn't something that they had already, but they thought that that would be a good addition.
This is Terrence. I think that's a good add. I mean, as I review the existing policy, I don't know if there are any of these subsections that capture equity in that way. I mean, there's the fair treatment for all students in admissions and non-selective, non-discriminatory access, but I do think that calls out equity in a very direct way. So I think that would be a really positive add to this document. Wendy or David, do you guys disagree?
No, I agree, but I would say if we're going to add it, which I do think it's a good add, that I would say we should set out in it. I don't know if it has to be all inclusive, but like at least the ESSA subgroups, but groups that we're talking about, like, you know, high poverty kids, kids with disabilities, English language learners, however we want to list them. But I think we should probably go, if we're going to talk about equity, we should list who we're talking about equity for.
Good points. Tess, or does anybody have any feedback on that?
Chanel, no, my only piece of, we could potentially, I could show you the state board's quality authorizing standards, because the standards go into further detail specifically on the subject of equity. So you all might be able to pull some language from those standards to insert here as a part of your just core principles. So I'll send you that document and point you in that direction, Chanel.
Thank you. Yes, and I think we'll also be talking a little bit more about that today, later on in the meeting as well. But that's a good point. So now I'll open it up. Are there any other comments just generally about the policy? And this is for the authorizing principles. If not, then we'll move on to our next one, and that will be the charter school agreement.
I do have a question on this one. I can wait until we get to it, or just hop right in like I usually do.
Sure, go ahead. Yes, we can.
And I think I know the answer, but the deletion of the authorizer fee, is
Yes.
that because the code specifies state board and not charter commission? And if that's the case, is there a plan to amend the statute, or are we going to proceed without an authorizer fee?
So that's a good question. So when I deleted it, it was because the code does read the state board. Now, as far as any plan in the legislature, including that for the commission, I'm not aware of that. That's something that I can follow back up on, unless Tess or someone else knows anything about that. But right now, it does read state board as far as the authorizer fee.
Wendy, it does. The commission is allowed to collect an authorizer fee. It may not be in that same subsection, but I will pull it up, and Chanel, I'll share that with you. It's at 3%, which is the level that the state board is at too.
Okay. So yeah.
And my reason for asking, I'm sure, I mean, I don't know if we have in our budget to be able to move. I mean, you know, I get that any dollars coming from a charter school come out of the classroom, and I know the state board was very careful and had all sorts of transparency around any of those dollars that they spent, and I would want to have those same transparency requirements. But if that's money that we'll have to rely on to actually do our work, then we probably need not to remove it.
Yes.
I don't know. I don't know enough about the money piece of.
So yes, Tess, if you don't mind, I guess sending over whatever that you're referencing, and then, you know, if that's something that we can just kind of slide that in for the policy that it looked like previously with the state board, just referencing another section or whatever other materials that you're aware of, Tess, I think that might be a good thing. Because certainly, you know, if there are authorizer fees out there and we're allowed to collect them, we'd want to include that in the policy as well.
While we're doing that, can I ask Tess? I remember we had pretty robust, like I said, parameters around that. Was that in policy? Was that in rule? We need to make sure we have that on our side too if we're going to collect a fee.
Yeah, so you're right, Wendy. There's an entire section of the code which is dedicated to the state board's authorizer fee, which is 118, which is what Chanel deleted. The commission's authorizer fee, as well as the LEA authorizer fees, are located in 128. I can share with Chanel the language around the commission's authorizer fee, but it says you'll receive an authorizer fee up to 3%. By May 1st of each year, the commission shall set the percentage by which you'll be collecting. And the commission may use the annual authorizer fee to fulfill obligations consistent with its authority of the commission as set forth in this chapter. So it doesn't have as in-depth around the authorizer fee that's currently within the state board section of the code.
So I would love for us, I guess as a committee, definitely as a commission, to, and definitely with a legal opinion somewhere, you know, not mine. I mean, I felt like the parameters that were around the state board authorizer fee were really critical for relationship building with the schools, to show that the state board was going to be accountable for all those dollars, and for transparency purposes. So if it's not in the statute that for us collecting the authorizer fee, if we can look into whether we can put that in our rules or policies so that we're still following that, because I felt like the state board's process for authorizers fees was really a model that we were hoping districts would follow. So I just think it's important to have that transparency piece and the commitment to ensuring where the dollars are going.
Really good point, Wendy.
Absolutely. And so after this call, and in between now and when we discuss it with the commission, I'll circle up with Tess and we can kind of work through and see what we can add in there, and try to get it as close as possible to the state boards, because if it's something that people know how to, they expect these kinds of things, I think that is certainly something that the public will appreciate as well. So that's a good point, Wendy.
Thank you.
So we'll add that piece in about the authorizer fee and then try to see if we can get as close to the state board's model as possible. Now, as far as their comments on this, it looks like if we go down to, again, that section generally, so they added a comment that that says while separate from the charter application, a charter agreement must incorporate all material components of the approved application under 4913-107B. So essentially, it just looks like they want us to just reference back to that statute, you know, because right now we have things listed, but just making sure that we point people that they need to have all of the required elements that are under statute. I think that's a good point. Their next comment is under 2F, where it talks about the responsibility and commitment of the charter school to adhere to the essential public education obligations. There they said they would be a little bit more explicit in regarding equity here again. So they said that, so their language is, they would say, state the responsibility and commitment of the school to adhere to essential public education obligations, including admitting and serving all eligible students so long as the space is available, and not expelling or counseling out students except pursuant to a legal discipline policy approved by the authorizer. So again, they're just trying to put in some more specific language on that equity piece. And as I read it, they want to make sure that, you know, if people or these charter schools are using any kind of discipline policies, that it's set out something that the authorizer has approved, and then also just making sure that that charter schools are admitting all eligible students, you know, as far as long as the space is there. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that piece.
This is G, right? Or
But it's F, so where it talks about the responsibility and commitment of the charter school to adhere to, yeah.
mine, it's G. F is the commission's performance standards. Oh, because I'm sorry, it's because I'm looking at the red line version. Sorry.
I'm looking at G too. Is it not G?
You're looking at the red line. You're looking at the red line also. So when they removed the authorizer fee, it moved them all up one, I think. is what happened.
Got it.
So I have the same problem, Terrence. We're on the same wavelength. So I think it's supposed to say concerning admissions and enrollment of students with disabilities and English language learners, comma, and discipline and expulsion. So, I mean, I'm fine with equity language. I do think, given the national and Tennessee data on students with disabilities and and English language learners and the gaps between percentages that are served in some charters versus the district, that we need to specifically call out that they have an obligation to serve students with disabilities and English language learners. So, I mean, I would keep those categories in. If you want to add more, that's fine, but I think those are categories that data shows can be troubling in some charters as far as serving those students.
And that was their recommendation, Chanel, right? Was to add the language, but keeping our language with the disabilities and the English language learners.
Well, the recommendation just says be more explicit about the equity. So it's not really clear whether they're saying delete that or not, but it seems as though you could keep that in there, but just add extra information to make sure that we're being more explicit. I think that's kind of what they intended here. So yeah, we could keep that section in there about the English language learners and then add on a tag that meets their equity piece as well.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Yeah. And then the next comment that they have is under section 5 about parties, terms, and amendments. the section starting with the commission will execute a charter agreement only with legally incorporated governing board. Their comment was that we may just wish to reference 4913 10413, which defines a sponsor. So again, just adding in some language in there about definitions.
I'm fine with that. What I don't want to do, and I don't think this is what they're advocating, or do I think I don't think this is what you're advocating, is that we turn this all into like references to statute, because it is intended for non-lawyers to be able to look at, but putting this reference to the statute in addition to the language, no harm, no foul.
Absolutely, yes. So where they talk about referencing parts of the statute, I do believe that they intended to, at least as I read it, just more so making it clear that, we're spelling these things out, but then, also kind of look to here, just so that we capture everything. But I agree.
It's almost as if they want us to just be affirmative in why this is in our policy or what the reference is.
Exactly. And I think it allows people to have some kind of like context kind of around, what we're saying. So certainly. So are there any other comments on the charter school agreement policy?
None from me.
Okay, so if not, then we can go on to the oversight and evaluation policy, and I'll give you a chance to pull that up as well. So if you all are ready, they didn't have too many comments on this policy, but where they did comment was under section 5 about school site visits. So right now the policy reads that the commission will conduct at least one annual site visit, and maybe Tess can give us some insight on the state board's practice of doing that. But NACSA actually recommends that that it would be closer to just more like an interim, and then a site visit at the end, like toward the end of their charter agreement. So they say that because the visits to schools should only be for appropriate and necessary reasons for collecting data that you can't otherwise get. So they're saying that annual seems a little bit too much, that it might kind of impact the autonomy of the charter school. So I don't know if you all have thoughts on that, or if Tess wants to weigh in. And this again is under 5A for school site visits. Whether or not we think that we should keep the language in there about conducting at least one site visit, or keeping it like 2 within the term as opposed to 1 annually.
So I would love to hear from Tess, but the terms are 10 years, right? So you're talking about don't show up for 5 years and then show up again at the end. I mean, my understanding of what the state board's thinking of on that, and again, it's not the commission, it's the state board staff that's going in. We're not all like, hopping in cars and going over there. It's staff members, and I think Tess has now had several years of experience with it. The rule mentions the qualitative piece, and my understanding was that was really important in the relationship piece and just the face-to-face time that's critical, that doesn't take away from autonomy, but is part of the relationship piece of it. But I'd love to hear from Tess on that.
Sure. And I will say that site visits, like if you can survey, 10 authorizers across the nation, and they're going to tell you if they have a different philosophy on site visits, because it is something that is very much kind of the philosophy around, are you purely outcomes driven, meaning you are only looking at the academic results and financial results and other kind of outcomes you're able to measure, or are you pulling in some of the qualitative pieces? The state board, from a philosophical perspective, felt like an annual site visit, which for us lasts one day that we're all on site, is important from the qualitative piece, because I think one of the things we hear from schools a lot is you all are just focused on the data. You don't understand what's happening day to day. And so it's a way for us to be present, hear about the school and the teachers that we have been hearing about, but actually see it in person. And actually then provide context to some of those data conversations that we have. But it is a commission decision. I will say that this may be something that evolves as your portfolio evolves. So right now, with a portfolio of 3 schools, it's a relatively easy lift for us to do, and it's how we prioritize throughout the year. Certainly, if you're looking at a portfolio the size of Shelby County schools with over 50 schools, that may be a different conversation. We also felt like if we were ever to have to come to the state board with a revocation decision or recommendation, it would be very hard for us to defend us if we've said we actually have never been in the school for the past 4 years because our policy says we don't visit until the interim. Again, that was a philosophical perspective when we were drafting these policies that we took, and happy to share with the commission whenever you all would like what the site visit reports look like that we send back to the schools as a touch point for them to understand what we saw, what we observed, and any kind of intervention related action that we may be necessary because of those site visits.
Yeah, I mean, my 2 cents is that there are things that you get from like the relationship is one, but there are things you get from being in a building that you don't get from paperwork. And with a 10-year term, I just think that is, I don't know that I definitely know I do not agree with NACSA on that, to have a 5-year visit and a 10-year visit. And I mean, I think what Tess is saying about now we have 3 schools. If we wind up with 20 or 30, it could be different, but I would personally like to see the 1-year site visits remain in this.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, as a former authorizer, I think being in the building means a lot on a lot of different levels. So Tess, I'm glad that you guys have had this in, and I think this is something that we should stick with. And I agree, Wendy. I don't disagree with NACSA a lot, but on this one, I think I'd have to disagree with them. We need to be in schools as frequently as possible without being overly intrusive. And I think once a year seems more than fair.
But what about when we have more than 3? I guess what I'm thinking is we could do it annually once a year. If we framed it as periodic or at our sole discretion, we could go once a year. But then if we had 10 schools or we didn't necessarily need to or want to go to each school annually, I guess I'm wondering, could we frame it in language that gives us the flexibility for future growth or discretion?
We can always change it, right?
Yeah, and I was going to say, this is our
policy, not a rule. So
yeah, this is our starting point, Dave. Yeah, so we could change it down the road. Though I would still argue whether we had 10 schools or 70 schools, we need to figure out a way to get to all 70 on a pretty regular basis. And visiting a school once a year is not unreasonable for any authorizer.
Got it.
But we could change it down the road, David, to your point. If it does get unwieldy and we have 100 schools, let's say, or 80, I think we should think about changing it down the road. But it would have to be a really large number for us not to visit on a consistent basis.
Chanel, let's make the language that the chair of the Rules and Policy Committee shall visit each school at least quarterly.
Are you fine with
I'll go with you, Terrence.
Well, note that was a joke for the record.
Oh yeah. Yes. So where do we come down on that? Do we want to keep keep it as is, or do we also want to maybe soften it a bit with language from time to time, or like at our sole discretion? Does anyone feel strongly one way or another?
I feel strongly we
With
leave it
Terrence
as
and
is.
Wendy. Yeah,
I feel
if they
strong.
want, if
Look
they
at
say
that.
as is, I'm good.
At least one. And Chanel and Wendy and David, I will make sure that I bring this to the attention of the full commission if there is a question about it. But I feel really strongly, and I think Wendy is in agreement there. So we'll keep the link.
Okay. So the next point that they say, again, is on that site visits, but we drop down to the next subsection about the commission developing a site visit protocol. So right now it says that we would articulate the expectations, but they also say that we should add in language about, we would also articulate the purpose for our visit. So, and they're saying there that there might be different reasons why you would have a site visit other than just, it's time to have a site visit. And so I don't know if Tess or if anybody has any thoughts on that. It seems like it might be a small change, but maybe it might become kind of, it might seem like we have to articulate a reason. So I don't know how you all feel on that point.
I'd love to hear from Tess and her thoughts on it.
Sure. So in our site visit protocol, we define the purpose of the visit, and that's something that we communicate throughout the process. Basically, it refers back to that section A where it talks about gathering qualitative data we wouldn't otherwise be able to collect. So I think if you want to reference a purpose in B too, I think that's totally fine. That's something we talk about a lot, is communicating the why to our schools and our stakeholders, and even parents or students that we're talking to, really communicating why we're there and what we're hoping to accomplish.
Yeah, it seemed like to me subsection A answers the purpose for B, the Tess's point.
Yeah.
I agree.
Okay. And then their next comment is on subsection C. And so right now it reads that the commission shall provide the school with a written report that summarizes the school's performance. And they just add that we would be doing that within a reasonable time, period of time, so that the observations can be addressed in a timely manner. So they just, kind of want to make sure that we're getting that information to them so that they can actually use it. So I don't know. It just seems like there's something to add in there, but it doesn't necessarily change the substance of what C is saying. So are we all fine with that? Just adding that reasonable, we're going to get that report in a reasonable time language.
Reasonable is always a great lawyer word.
Reasonable. Yeah. Okay.
That works for me. That makes sense.
Unless anybody wants to add a time, like a specific time, but I think that might be a little more. Okay. And then they just kind of added more context with their next comment, and I'll read it. They said that authorizers should ensure the feedback they are given relates to their current performance or observations regarding the framework and is not prescriptive in nature. So they recommend that we word recommendations like that, so that we're not being prescriptive, but that it's like the current, whatever that we are seeing at this time. And so that's just kind of what their thoughts on it. I don't know that they pointed to anything specific in there, but that was just kind of their thoughts. I don't know if you all have anything about how it's worded right now, or maybe just adding in that.
I think that sounds like it's like how they want us to approach it, not
Yeah.
necessarily how the language is. And I think that's how it's been approached by the state board team in the past. I don't think they've gone in and written like citations or anything. I think they've been, I mean, I think it's all about the relationship between the authorizer and the school, and the point of it is to continue to build that. So I don't know that we need language that says that. If anybody have any thought, I don't know.
No, I agree with you on that, Wendy.
Yeah, and well, they did say that the word recommendations might sound a little bit prescriptive, and so they say that we should maybe change it to identifying areas of strength and weakness. So do you all have, I mean, I don't know if that has a negative connotation with recommendation, but they said it might.
It says general recommendations, and if I'm a school and my authorizer comes in and they see some things that they're concerned about, I would much rather them tell me. Hey, I mean, you know, again, they're not ordering it because they can. I have autonomy. Something really bad. I'd much rather them just give me a recommendation than give me some list of like, here are your good qualities, here are your bad qualities. I have to figure it out, right? So I think it's written fine the way it is, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah.
And Chanel, you may actually just refer to subsection 6C. If you go down further where it talks about autonomy, C actually hits to the point that everybody's making. And so maybe it's just provide general recommendations in alignment with subsection 6C of this policy, right? So because it goes into not meaning like you're not going to prescribe solutions except for areas of non-compliance as required by federal and state law, which gets to Wendy's point. So it might cover all your bases.
Perfect. Yeah, I think we cover it in 6C. So
Yeah.
the guys at NACSA, they may not have just caught the reference there.
Yes, and so that's actually their last comment was about that. For them, they said that 6C meets what they were intending to get at, but they said that the word recommendation didn't necessarily align with that.
I see.
So I think that's more the connotation of the word recommendation for them.
Got it.
But if we're fine, it sounds to me like we're fine kind of leaving the language as is and just adding in maybe, you know, in alignment with 6C. That kind of marries the two anyway.
Yeah, that makes sense, Chanel. Yeah, let's do it that way.
Okay. So are there any other general thoughts about the oversight policy?
None from me.
Oh, I'm good.
Okay, so then I'm going to bring up our charter school autonomy. And on this one, they didn't, at least they didn't send back any comments on this one. So I'll just open it up right away. If you all have any points, any questions about the policy, if you see anything that might need to be updated. But otherwise, they didn't comment on the charter school autonomy policy.
Good to me. I think it's in direct agreement with their best practices, and I voted on it once before, so I'm ready to vote on it.
Yeah, this one looked pretty standard.
Okay. So if there's no other comments on that one, we'll go on to the charter school intervention. They had a few comments on this one. So at the beginning of it, where it talks about purpose, like the purpose of this policy is to set forth criteria and process for charter school intervention. They said they just make a semantic kind of change to say authorizer intervention. And I think for them, they said that it just clarifies to stakeholders who's doing the intervening. I don't know if you all feel one way or the other about maybe changing charter school intervention and the purpose to authorizer intervention?
It's fine. Yeah.
Fine with me.
Okay. And then their next comment is under subpart 3, talking about the grounds for intervention. If you look under B, they say that, let me pull it up. So I'm going to use their language. So right now it says, depending on the severity of the concern or deficiency, the commission reserves the right to revoke the charter agreement in accordance with the statute. And then it goes on to the commission deems that so if the commission deems that an intervention other than the contract revocation is appropriate, it's permitted to jump levels. So that's how it's written there. They say that their sample intervention policy would add in, particularly in situations where it's necessary to protect the student in public interest. So just like adding a tag in there that there might be some differences. But then they also said that it might be a little bit redundant in light of subsection F, where it talks about if there's immediate concern for health and safety, that there might be other outcomes. I don't know if we feel strongly one way or the other about adding in language about when we wouldn't go, straight to another level, but
I do think it's covered down below, and I don't want to be so repetitive, but
yeah,
I don't really care one way or the other. But I do think it's covered in the lower section.
okay.
Yeah.
I think.
I'm good at this.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, no, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just agreeing with Wendy on it. I think it's covered in the section down below.
Okay. So do we want to leave it like that, or do we want to take it out because it's covered below?
I would leave it as is rather than adding the extra
As
language.
is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Leave it as is.
And that was all the comments that they had on here. I will say for this intervention policy, this is just to kind of get you all started. And Tess and I have already kind of discussed this. Whenever you all get your permanent staff in place, that might be something that you revisit as far as, going out and talking to charter schools and getting their feedback and really just developing this further to meet the commission's kind of goals and things that the commission would want. But this is just the starting point. So if there's anything that somebody wants to maybe change right now, but in light of the fact that it might get changed a little bit down the road anyway, once you all have permanent staff in place.
Yeah, I will just say this, again, we'll decide for purposes of the commission, but when the state board and the staff were developing this, they worked there was a lengthy process in doing this, and they did a lot of feedback collection too. So I think continuing what Tess was doing with that would make sense once we have staff, but it was a really well thought out plan in my definitely as a starting point.
Are there any other comments?
I just want to mention, because you and I talked about this via email for the commission members here, that the charter agreements that the state board have adopted reference to the intervention policy. So one of the things that I caution when Michelle and I were talking about this is, this is one of the policies that would, when the commission may be making further changes, would have to negotiate those with your authorized charter schools, because this policy is referenced in the agreed upon charter agreements.
So are there any other thoughts on this one?
from me.
Okay, so if not, then we can go to our final policy that we'll be looking at today. And that is the LEA as a sponsor policy. And here again, they didn't add any comments to what we had. So I'm happy to take some comments from you all if you have any on the LEA as a sponsor.
My only comment is I am not sure I will live long enough to see an LEA try to sponsor a charter school, but maybe I will. We'll see.
Never say never. No, this one was also pretty straightforward, Chanel. So I didn't have anything.
Okay. Well, then that concludes everything. And I'll forward their email. Like I said, they just sent it late yesterday, so didn't get a chance to send it out to you all prior to this meeting. But of course, we'll discuss it again at the commission meeting. So in between now and then, if there's other thoughts, feel free to email me. But that's all that I had for today. I know we're also kind of thinking forward. We'll be developing a framework. So that's on the horizon. And then also later on, we'll have to start looking at some of the policies in our role as an LEA type situation. So there's quite a few of those. And I know that I believe Tess said there might be some changes at the state board, or they were undergoing some sort of process with that. So we've kind of held off until they've finished their review. Is that correct, Tess? Or?
Sure. The state board conducts an annual audit of our LEA policies. As you can imagine, like all of their school districts across the state, as statute change, state board policies, rules change, we have to update our policies. So we typically make those updates at our May meeting. And I shared with Chanel that I don't want to share Word documents that are going to be changing. So actually after tomorrow's meeting at the state board, we'll be able to share the full current Word master versions to Chanel so she can get started working on those.
So yes, so those are the things that we'll be looking forward to at our next, committee meetings, is just kind of getting into the LEA type policies, and then also at some point getting it back to that performance framework as well.
Thank you guys for all your work on this. And Mr. Chair, thank you for your leadership.
Thank you. Thank you guys for your comments. And I just had one question before we close. When we were talking about the fee, we are still planning on having an authorizer fee. The question is just, how do we incorporate that by reference in our policy?
That is correct. Yes. So as it was written in there, I saw that there was a lot on state board authorizer fees. But as Tess shared, there's also a section where the commission could charge an authorizer fee. So I'll circle up with her and see what we can develop as far as like a kind of a mirror what they're doing now as far as their fee schedule and all of that. So I'll get with Tess on that.
Okay.
But that's correct. Yes.
And Terrence, what I was talking about was all of the policy around how it was collected, how they determined how much, what transparency was around how the money was spent, and whether if money wasn't spent, it was to be returned, right, Tess? All of that is in the state board statute, I guess, that was passed doing it, and it's not in our statute. So figuring out if we could put that in our rules and regs, because that was all a lot of that was developed through the charter committee at the state board, met with school leaders, had conversations with them, really did it collaboratively. So I would love to see that model policy somehow wind up at the commission.
Got it. Cool. Thank you for clarifying that. Chanel, did you have anything else?
I do not, other than to say, just kind of giving you a heads up about our July. We have our rulemaking hearing coming up on July 10th, and that'll be a virtual meeting. So we'll be able to hear back from the public on some of those appeals rules that we discussed last time. And so that's just the next step in our process in getting these rules in place. So July 10th.
Okay, good. Great.
Will we get a link sent to us for that?
Yes,
To
so we
watch?
already
I mean,
have.
not like to participate, but to watch.
Yes, so there's a link already on our notice of rulemaking, and so I'll just see if maybe Andrea can forward that to everyone so that you all can watch. I mean, one part of the rulemaking hearing is that the public will have to be able to speak. So like right now in our committee meetings, they're encouraged to listen, but there's not that interaction really. But with the rulemaking hearing, we'll really want to be able to hear from the public. So it's set up a little bit different. So I'll let Andrea circle back up with everyone to make sure we all have the link and that we can watch.
Right. And those, the way I attended several when back before people did everything out of their houses. And it was the state board's lawyer. So I'm assuming you would be the person that would be hosting the meeting and inviting okay. Okay.
Yes.
It'll be interesting to see how many people are interested in this. We had some with line out the door, and we had some where I think the lawyers were just sitting there like on the clock until the time expired. So
Yeah. I don't know if the perhaps with it being virtual, it might make it easier for people to feel like they want to participate. So we'll see.
yeah, cool. Thank you. Thanks for everything you're doing.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks, Chanel, and also Wendy and David. Thanks to you guys for being active participants on the committee. Really appreciate it. And then also, before we do close, I'll recognize any members if there are any closing remarks, and then I'll also recognize any of our commission members that are listening in if there are any remarks in closing.
I just want to add a thank you to Tess for her participation too. I don't think I've thanked her yet. So.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, if hearing no request for any further remarks, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Motion.
I move we adjourn.
All right. Well, it is. It sounds like it's been seconded?
Second.
Great. So it is 2:12 p.m. Central Standard Time, and we are now adjourned. Thank you all, and I will see you guys soon.
Thank you.
Thanks. Take care. Be safe.